Welcome to Plan9Crunch, and today we are interviewing Bob Blackburn, who runs the Ed Wood Jr. Facebook page. And there's a lot more to talk about, but I'm going to give him an opportunity. First, I'm Doug Gibson. This is Joe Gibson. And Bob, you come from the Seattle area, and your father was a prominent person in sports broadcasting, and you also entered the radio career. Kiss FM. I remember listening to that as a kid all the time. It's
Right,
one of the
right,
stations.
right.
Westwood One, and you also had quite a career in designing stages. This book, which is called Kathy Wood and I: How I Fell Down the Ed Wood Jr. Angora Rabbit Hole, is both a memoir of your life and a memoir of Kathy Wood's life to some degree, and it
A little
answers so
bit, yeah.
many questions Ed Wood files like myself have about his life. But first, tell us about your life up to the point where you met Kathy.
Well, I was actually born in San Jose, California, but my dad had already won the job to broadcast AAA baseball in Portland for the Portland Beavers in 1950-51. And so that's where I was raised. And I had five brothers and sisters that followed in fairly quick succession. And my dad kept trying to get major league jobs as a sportscaster. And in 1967, he won the job of being the first broadcaster in for the Seattle Supersonics of the NBA. So we packed up and moved to Seattle in 1967, my junior going into my junior year of high school. So um, I was kind of raised up there. Went to college for a couple of years, dropped out, had a bunch of dead end jobs, friends, what and whatnot. Um, Played some music, played in a couple of bands. Nothing that really took off. So I never had a career in music. I had a passion for it.
Can I break for one question? What was the name of your band when
There
you were
was a
in?
couple.
What was the name?
I actually had a band in Portland in 1966. We literally were a garage band called the Hard Times. Now we were all 15 years old. So what kind of hard times do we have? We had to come in and have dinner when the sun went down, or we had homework. It was hard being 15 in 1966. But in Seattle, I was in a band called the Adults that changed its name to the Color Place, and then 1984 garage band called Liquid Generation. So there you go. My
Okay,
one
keep
claim
going,
to
keep
fame.
going. I'm sorry I cut you off, but keep going now from there.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I had a bunch of friends that played in bands, and I didn't really have. I was custodian at some churches. I just, window washer, line cook at Black Angus restaurants. Just kind of didn't have a college education, didn't have a skill. And in 1985, a friend of mine's band were looking to relocate down to Los Angeles. They were called the Moberlys. And their drummer called me up. He knew I had a van that I'd been hauling our band's equipment around. And he asked me if I wanted to help them relocate to Hollywood. And I said, sure. So we came down here. I stayed for a couple days. I just kind of scoped it out a little bit, and I thought, LA's not as bad as I thought it was. Being from the Northwest, you have this kind of disdain for the quote unquote plasticness of
Hmm.
LA and all that kind of stuff. But I could enjoy it. But the thing was I did not have a marketable skill.
Hmm.
I mean, I could come down here and been a line cook at a Black Angus, but that's not going to cut it. So I eventually went through radio broadcasting school. I had avoided it all my life. I didn't want to follow in my dad's footsteps. We share the same name. I was be like Chick Hearn Jr. So I'm sure you know who Chick
I
Hearn
do.
was.
He might not.
And
I do.
yeah, and so that's kind of how I was looked at, basically. Like, how's your dad? How's the team going to do this year? Blah, 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 blah. But I ended up going through radio broadcasting school on my own and ended up getting a couple of jobs out of school as what they call a board operator, where I didn't have the voice to be on the air, but I had the skill set that I
Hmm.
could go in and run the programming uh, like on the weekends or overnights, play the music, play the commercials, play the weather reports. And I did that for 2 years. And most of that time, I did that 7 days a week at two different stations. And at one of the stations, my program director's name was Maureen Matthews. And in the winter of 1986, '88, both my jobs ended, and I'd been working, like I said, 7 days a week for nearly a year. I decided to take a break and come down to LA and visit my sister Bonnie, who had just had her first baby daughter. And it was the middle of winter, and I came down here. And my friend Maureen Matthews had actually relocated here down here herself and had a job in radio. And I called her asking her if she knew of any radio jobs in LA. I felt I was now at the point where I had a quote unquote marketable
Hmm.
skill, and I had worked for her, and she liked my work, and she would have at least put in a recommendation for me. And I called her while I was here. She said, "Call tomorrow, and I'll check with my fiance. He happens to be the program director at a radio station, and I think they're looking for help." I called her the next day, and she said, "I can only he would love for you to come down, but he can only offer you 12 hours a week of work, but it pays good." And I had nothing going on, so I said, "Tell him I'll take it." And she said, "Well, we don't really need you until April," and this was like December. So I ended up giving my notice at my apartment. I moved down the 1st of March, and I stayed with my sister for 2 days when I got down here. And I knew where the studio, by this point, I knew that I'd be working for Kiss FM, which is like the powerhouse
Yeah, it
station, one of
was.
the number one rated radio stations in the world. And I would be running the weekly top 40 countdown with Rick Dees, and also the American top 40 with Shadow Stevens on the weekends. That was kind of what my job entailed. And my sister and I came in. Their studios at that time were about a block east of Sunset and Vine, and they were on the 11th floor of the building, which at one point became the House of Blues building, and now I think it's just the bank building. Anyway, I'm getting there.
No,
And
this is
um,
very interesting. Please
this
go
is
on.
kind of how the book goes.
Yeah.
Like I had a friend of mine, Paul Apple, who was kind of editing this for me, and he said, you can kind of cut that little part out about cut to the chase, or we're
I, I
getting there.
I read your book last week. I love it. Okay, so keep going.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll tell Paul that. And so anyway, we went looking for an apartment that was within a bicycle ride. I didn't have a car at that time, and I knew my shift would be early in the morning. Like I'd have to get up and get out of here at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday morning. And so the apartment building we found was this little 5-story, kind of worn down apartment that had been here since the 1920s. And the rent was $400 a month, first and last in deposit. And it was a little studio. And I took it and moved in and started, well, working my job. And that was in March of 1989. So there we go.
Now, tell me how you went to an Ed Wood Film Festival and then recognized somebody that you
Yeah.
thought you knew.
Yeah. Well, the circumstances was that people asked me if I was an Ed Wood fan. And beforehand, before I went to this film festival that was called the Ed Wood-a-thon. And I said, well, had heard of Ed. I knew that there had been some film festivals up in Seattle, like, college film festivals, or the alternative movie, people would have an Ed Wood Film Festival. And I'd heard about Plan 9, but I'd never seen it. And this was in 1992. So 3 years after living in Hollywood, working, getting acclimated, mainly going out and seeing a lot of music and bands and stuff at a couple of the local clubs that I could walk to and then crawl home from. So that, because Hollywood had a lot of little bars and nightclubs that had live music in them. So that was kind of living for the music. Um, but that one summer, they had the Ed Woodathon. It was Eric Caden from Hollywood Book and Poster and Johnny Legend, for this one summer, had rented out the Hawaiian Gardens Theater on kind of the east side of Hollywood Boulevard. And every weekend they were running a film festival of some sort of cult movies and whatnot. And this one weekend they did the Ed Woodathon. And I'd gone to one of their weekend screenings a week or two prior. and they were always fun. You're seeing stuff that I would never normally go out and see, and so they would. They were having this whole weekend of nothing but Ed Wood films. They were going to have special guests there. This is when Rudy Gray's Nightmare of Ecstasy had come out, and Rudy was in town to actually sell copies and sign copies of the book. Now, I didn't meet or see. I think I may have seen Rudy that weekend, but I had no interaction with him, and I did not get a copy of Nightmare of Ecstasy at that time. But I did go to the Saturday and the Sunday. It was a 3-day weekend, but I went on the Saturday and the Sunday and saw a ton of Ed's films, not just the main ones, with Plan 9 and Bride of the Monster and, all of this kind of stuff, but they were also showing like the Kenny Duncan Remington commercials and all
Mm-hmm.
this like hard to find esoterica. And they were showing the Plan 9 companion documentary that was kind of that weekend that premiered was at that weekend film festival. And then they also had the Incredibly Strange Film Show, which was, I always
Jonathan
jokingly,
Ross, right? Jonathan
I'm
Ross.
sorry?
Was that Jonathan Ross?
Yes, Jonathan
Yeah.
Ross, right. I always ascribed it to being done by the BBC. Whenever I'd always tell people I saw this BBC documentary on Ed Wood and Kathy was in it, but it was not the BBC. It was Channel 4, which was
Mm-hmm.
an independent channel in the UK. So they're screening this documentary, and I'm sitting next to a couple of friends of mine, a girl who played in a band that I was fans of. They were called the Muffs, and she had actually been in a band called the Pandoras, which were a fairly well-known garage, all-female garage group. And so during the screening, they had the interview with this woman. The scroll said Kathy Wood, Ed Wood's widow, and there was this lady, and she looked vaguely familiar to me. And I nudged my friend Melanie, and I said, Mel, I think that lady lives in my apartment building. And she said, "Oh, that's cool. I wonder if it's really her." And I said, "I don't know, but when I go home tonight, I'm gonna look at the mailbox. I knew an apartment the lady lived in. Now I used to see her walking her dog all the time, or we'd pass each other in the hallway. Neighbors. Hi, how do you do? How you doing? La di da. A couple of times before I knew who she was, she'd be walking down to the bus stop on Hollywood Boulevard, and I'd be walking down to work on Sunset Boulevard. By this time, I was working for the satellite, the Unistar radio network satellite division, and we would chat a little bit. Um, but I had no clue that she was Ed's widow until that screening. And I went home that evening and I looked at the mailbox and it said K Wood. And I went, uh-oh, I have a feeling that might be Ed's widow for real. And I bumped into her a couple weeks after that, and I kind of point blank asked her if she was Ed's widow, and she got all defensive and
Mm-hmm.
like, well, what do you want to know? And I went, well, there was this film festival of your husband's films, and I explained that whole weekend, and she got upset that she wasn't invited, and she wanted to know who was there and if what they were saying about Ed, and I listed off some of the people like Stephen Apostoloff and Vampira and Paul Marco and Conrad Brooks, all these people who I would come to know later on, but at
Very
the
well.
time they were just names and personalities, right? Like Vampira, I had heard the name, had no clue, and until watching Plan 9 from Outer Space, did not know she was in an Ed Wood film. So that's kind of how I officially met Kathy Wood, Ed Wood's widow.
Okay, I wanted to ask you a question. You
Yeah.
talk about how she was a little guarded when you first said that, and Kathy Wood, based on your book, apparently was hurt by a depiction of Ed Wood in the Angora documentary. Is that correct? I wonder if that's why she sort of shied away at times.
Well, that was a different that was yet to come.
Why do you think she was so guarded at that time? And it been because of a
No, well,
couple
because she because of fanboys, you know.
fanboys, huh?
Yeah. So I mean, she did not like to let people into her apartment. She reluctantly agreed to be interviewed by both Rudy Gray, and I'm sure that I have a Polaroid photograph with Kathy, Rudy Gray, and Jonathan Ross, and the producer for the documentary. So I have a feeling that Rudy Gray was the go-between
Ah,
Jonathan Ross in doing the on-film interview with Kathy for the documentary. I don't think that people in the world of Ed Wood knew where Kathy lived. They might have just through the grapevine, so to speak. So I don't know if she was getting people, just strangers knocking at her door,
ah.
the fanboy type that just, oh, Mrs. Wood, can I talk to you about Ed Wood? Or oh, I have a script that's just I know Eddie would have loved it.
That's a good point because when you were talking about fanboys and how she would be at these events and they would give her a script or something or a book or something, I am an Ed Wood file. I'm totally am. But I
Yeah.
would never, ever, if I had met Kathy Wood, I just would have thanked her for, her husband and the work he did. I would not have tried to push a script on her or something.
No, but you would want to get a selfie with her, right?
I
We
don't,
all would.
I don't know. I
You would
mean,
have asked politely. Come on. You would have said, "Do you mind if?" And she would have then turned into that little school girl
probably.
vibe
You know what?
where
I wouldn't have known what a selfie was back then,
You
but
still don't. You still can't take them.
yeah, he doesn't. He doesn't. I don't know how to take selfies. That's a little joke in my
oh,
phone.
I'm the same way. I'm
Yeah.
the same way.
So okay, I want to jump ahead a little bit now because what I find interesting in your book was when you found out about the Ed Wood movie
Uh-huh.
and you went to contact Burton's company. It may
Right.
have been Denise DeNova. I can't remember who.
Yeah, Denise
And
Inovi, yeah.
and she said, "We've been looking for her. We can't find her."
Right.
And I thought to myself at first, "That's ridiculous." But now I'm realizing this is pre-internet.
Well, yeah, and her name wasn't in the phone book.
It wasn't. Okay. Okay.
No, no.
So I can just.
And you had to know the secret code. Let the phone ring. I can't remember
Yeah,
if it
you
was
mentioned a secret
twice.
code in your book.
Ring twice, hang up, and call back. Then she knew it was somebody that knew her. Otherwise, it was a bill collector or somebody trying to sell her life insurance or whatever, or a fanboy, or Columbia Pictures trying to get her to sign a contract to be portrayed in Ed Wood, the movie.
And that was only for $10,000 they were offering her. But you contacted a lawyer, Rob Weinberg, who became a lifelong friend also. His name is
Yeah,
Bob Weinberg, not Rob. I'm sorry.
Bob, yeah.
Yeah, and so and now you don't go into the details. I'm not asking you to, but he managed to
Thank
get
you.
a contract for her.
Mhm.
And tell us a little bit about the Ed Wood experience. I really think that Patricia Arquette seems like a very nice person based on.
She was.
Yeah,
She,
go on,
she
please. Tell us
absolutely
a little bit
was.
more about the movie experience for her.
Well, Kathy and I, once Bob Weinberg came into the picture, he started dealing with the Disney people. Originally, the film was going to be released through Columbia. They put it in turnaround because Tim Burton wanted it to be in black and white.
Yeah.
Once Patricia was cast to play Kathy, she asked the studio to get in touch with Kathy to see if they could actually meet and have lunch together so that she could talk with her a little bit and kind of get a feel for what the real Kathy was like, and also to chat a little bit about her relationship with Eddie and all that kind of stuff. So we actually had a nice lunch down at Musso and Frank's, and so that was that. Patricia, I gave her my phone number at work in case she needed to get in touch with Kathy, that I could relay a message and stuff like that. And she actually used that a couple of times, which I thought was interesting. So we knew the production was going to be starting, and they actually with Stan, we were just walking down near Hollywood Boulevard in Cahuenga. There used to be a small theater that was in what is now a parking lot called Theater. And in the opening actual sequence of Ed Wood, the film, after the opening credits, they pan to Ed Wood, Johnny Depp pacing back and forth in the rain outside of this small theater.
Yeah, remember that.
And that was the set piece, was this called, and they were showing the Casual Company, whatever. Now, in real life, that set was built, and I was walking to work down Cahuenga one day, and I saw the set for the Casual Company. So I knew that they were actually starting filming on the movie. We were not in the loop as far as, they didn't come to us and ask permission, like, is it okay if we start filming next week?
Hmm.
They were on their schedule. And so they were filming, and later, a week or so later, they were doing a lot of filming here in Hollywood, actually. And Kathy was coming home from the grocery store when she happened to pass um, a film shoot, which goes on in Hollywood fairly often, as you can imagine, like for a TV show or a
Yeah.
movie where they have the big wagons and the crew and all that kind of stuff, and then an area is kind of roped off where they're doing the actual production. And she walked by what she said was like an alleyway or something, and they were doing this film shoot, and she was coming back from the grocery store, and she had a couple of little bags of some groceries and a couple of bottles of wine, and she paused and she asked one of the police officers that they always have guarding the set, asked what movie they were making, and the guard said something like, "Oh, Ed Wood," and she exclaimed, "Oh, it's my husband!" And somebody overheard her, and I think it was Scott Alexander, one of the scriptwriters, who was at the shoot that day, because this was fairly early in the shoot, and I don't know if they needed the screenwriters to be nearby in case they wanted a line change. I don't.
Mhm.
That's not my. That's not what I know. So, but anyway, so theoretically, from what I heard, what Kathy told me later was that somebody came up to her, and I think Denise Genovi was there that day too, the producer, and asked if she wanted to meet Tim Burton and whatever and be introduced. And I think they did that. And then Scott or Denise said, we would love to take you over to talk with Johnny Depp. He's at his dressing trailer a couple blocks away. Would you be able to do that? And she said, okay. So they drove her over there, and she said she spent about an hour in Johnny's trailer. He just plied her with questions. There's actually a little clip on YouTube I saw not too long ago with Johnny Depp talking about his interaction with Kathy Wood that day, which I kind of just reinforces what she had told me. And by the same token, they also invited her to come down the next day. They were shooting a block from our apartment building down on Hollywood and Wilcox. And in the scene in the Ed Wood movie, it's when Ed and Bela are walking on the sidewalk and there's tourists, and Bela starts the "home, I have no home"
Mhm.
speech. And the tourists are there, and when Bela's done, they all start clapping and, applauding. And that was the scene that they were going to be shooting. Um, so Kathy, they invited her down to the set. She went down there. They found a little chair for her to sit, introduced her to Johnny again and to Martin Landau and Tim and whatnot. And this is when Kathy took Ed's wallet with her. I don't know why she thought to do this, but she did. She took Ed's wallet down there and she loaned it to Johnny Depp to wear during the shoot, the film shoot.
That's
A
really cool.
little piece of Ed. Now she may have told him the day before that she had it and that she would do that, the next day when she saw him. I still don't know. It's a mystery. We eventually got the wallet back. I have it. And hopefully it's going to be displayed at the Hollywood Museum in October. But that's another story for later on.
Well, it's so, to me, your book about Kathy, it's very poignant to me. I look at some of the pictures at the back where she's by the pool and Ed's diving off
Second floor.
second floor, and also the Fuller Brushman family
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
who they were friends with. Because your book, now I know that a woman named Angel Scott is preparing a biography. I'm going to read
Right.
that. But
Yeah,
your book,
I can't wait.
yeah, your book to a large extent uncovered a lot of areas that Ed Wood files, like myself, wanted to know about his life. And when I read the passages with you and Kathy and her being treated so wonderfully by the people with the Ed Wood production, and
Right.
also I own a bootleg copy of I Woke Early the Day I Died. Don't tell
Yeah.
anybody that.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
so
all right. No. There's a few of them floating around. It's no
yeah,
problem.
but it's just so wonderful to me to see Kathy get this kind of attention and kind of love from people, being in the movie too, having a small part in it.
Yeah.
And I love her caustic personality you provide in the book. Like when someone will tell her something in great detail, and you'll come back home and she'll just, or she reviews it when she comes back home, a book or a play idea, and she's just this is all awful.
Yeah. It was crap. That was
Yeah.
usually her comment was it was crap. We went to see a staged version of Plan 9, which I had actually seen before, and I had told the director and the people that put on the show. I said, "Oh, by the way, I'm a friend of Mrs. Ed Wood, and she might like to come and see it." So they put us on a guest list for the following weekend. It's just a small theater company, and it was just kind of zany. It was like a Marx Brothers, like Duck Soup or something. You
Uh-huh.
know, the way they did it. And she was very nice and very polite while she was there. The cast loved seeing her. Being after the show was over, I don't think the director told the cast that Mrs. Wood was going to be there that night for fear that they might go up on their lines or forget their lines or whatever. Um, and she was nice enough to talk to people at the theater group afterwards and maybe even post her a couple of little pictures and stuff. But when we got in the car, that was a piece of crap. Yeah. And I went, well, sorry, I hope I didn't waste your time. She says, no, 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 that's okay. The one thing she really did love, though, was the Plan 9, the musical that Mark and Mark, I call them, the two Marks, got the permission from Wade Williams to create the Plan 9, the musical, which is another long story, which I really didn't delve into that in the book. They're too much in there anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll let them tell their story. But we went to um, Plan 9 the musical, and after it was over, Kathy talked to the cast and got a nice picture with them. And the Mark and Mark they're actually a married couple now. They when California legalized marriage between gay people, they finally could tie the knot. But they've been together for 20 some odd years. And when we were leaving, they had a little gift for Kathy. They gave her a VCR, which I thought was really nice.
Mm-hmm.
And we hooked it up the next day or two, and she started collecting some VHS tapes and stuff, especially the Kevin Spacey
Yeah,
stuff.
she loved Kevin
Loved
Spacey.
Kevin Spacey.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I hope you liked the story about me getting the letter from Kevin
Yes,
Spacey.
it was very good, and it's funny because in that book, you do acknowledge Kevin Spacey has a controversial history now. However, he does show a tremendous amount of kindness to her.
Yeah, I was really actually surprised, but I was, as the English say, chuffed
Yeah.
that he actually responded to her letter. It took a couple months, but eventually she did get a letter back to the one that I gave to the music director for his live show that he was touring behind the Bobby Darin film. And when I went to London, I saw him in a production of oh God, what is it? The Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, Katharine Hepburn film. Anyway, and I did get the chance to meet him afterwards and give him another letter from Kathy, and he signed a couple of publicity photographs that I saved for her birthday that year.
Well, you
Which is,
talked about it was interesting how you went through the different channels and were hoping to get to see Kevin Spacey, and then you didn't tell Kathy everything because
no.
you didn't want to get her hopes up, but everything
Well,
worked out.
Yeah. And plus, if she signed it, I wanted to make it a big surprise for
Yeah.
her. Like, oh, but wait, there's more, And so at the birthday dinner, like I write in the memoirs, like we'd gotten done, with all the little gift giving, and that was the night she actually got a little. She backed up into a nail or something against the wall and
Yes.
had a little thing and she wasn't in a good mood after that. A couple of glasses of white wine helped a little bit. But we and Mark were there. They became close friends of ours. And so after all the little gifts were done, I reached down and I pulled out this little thing. And when she opened the paper, I said, oh wait, I forgot. I got one more for you. And she opened the paper and she saw that it was this photograph of Kevin Spacey that was signed to her. And it's actually... is this it? Hold on. Ow, jeez.
Oh, that's cool. That's really nice. Up a little higher.
Up higher? There is that
right
better?
There. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah,
I can't see the screen now. All I'm seeing is the back of the picture.
Well, we're seeing you. We're seeing the picture. Don't worry about that.
Okay, well that's the main thing I wanted you to see. So he autographed it to Kathy, and I say unfortunately I have it now. That's only because she's gone. But glad that I do. And her reaction was not quite what I anticipated. She looked at me and she slapped me on the leg and said, "You lied to me." And, and I went, "What?" She said, "You said you didn't see him." And I went, like, I'm so sorry. I said, "But Kathy, I actually handed him your letter in person." And he was very grateful for it. So she got over it. So anyway.
Well, Joe's going to have a question here in a second, but I want to preface it by saying you provide personality looks at Kathy Wood, who is somebody that we didn't really know much about her personality. Like,
Yeah.
she was very, very health conscious late in life, wanted to
Yeah.
stay trim and everything. She loved
Yeah.
split pea soup. I can't remember the can.
Anderson's split pea soup. Yeah.
Yeah, and also you give some of a background of her family too in the book,
A
which is
little
very
bit.
interesting.
Yeah. I wish I could have found out more about that. And her sister, who she was not close, they had a strained relationship and stuff. They would exchange birthday cards and Christmas cards. Her younger sister is nicknamed Marnie, and I had her phone number for a while after Kathy passed away. I think we called to let her know about that. But I'm sure she's passed away by now. So I never really got a chance to talk to Marnie and get more biographical background information. And my memory's not quite what it was, because Kathy used to like to talk about growing up in Vancouver. She had an uncle that lived at the house that the uncle had helped build, and her dad was an engineer who worked out in the forests, the northern forest of northern Vancouver, British Columbia.
Well, she had a tragedy in her life, a 1-2 punch of her mother dying, and also was it her preferred aunt also?
Yeah, her favorite Aunt Mary. Yeah.
Okay, their marriage was interesting because they seemed, they started out in the 50s, living in apartments, and then they had I would think kind of a neighborhood, if not suburbia existence with homes.
I'd say suburban, yeah.
Yeah, suburban existence with homes and everything, and you add some into understanding about his work with Sam Yorty, the conventional work, and also with the aeronautics, which required
aeronautics, yeah,
government passes, and then it gets. I get the sense it gets grimmer for them, all right, because Ed's drinking gets worse gradually over time. But Joe wanted to ask a question. Joe, what is the question you wanted to ask?
I'm waiting, Joe.
Well, just when do you think was the best time or era for them, Ed and Kathy?
It was when they owned the house that they actually bought with Ed's GI Bill. I can't remember the address or when it would have been, late 50s, early 60s. And I think she mentions that in the probate deposition, which I included as one of the appendixes. Yeah, in the back of the book. And she always said that was their happiest period together. They had their own house. It had a swimming pool. They could invite all their buddies over for parties and whatnot. And I don't even know exactly how long they lived there, but eventually, like, the car got repossessed, and then they lost the house, and then they had to move to, just kind of I call it the downward spiral. Of one step ahead of the landlord, or depending on how the work came around. I mean, Ed was doing his writing. In the early mid 60s, he started working with Apostolov for Orgy of the Dead. He also started writing the little novels, but he wasn't. He might get a couple $100 for one of those books, and you do one every couple years. That's not going to pay the rent,
No,
I mean, it'll barely pay for the dog food now, because they always had dogs. They love dogs, and I have a feeling that sometimes the dogs would eat before they would eat. They loved them that much. Plus the drinking, the smoking, the hard party lifestyle that Ed kind of lived, and I think Kathy kind of kept up with him pretty well and stuff. And she was no angel. I could portray her as an angel.
She was an earthy person with a unique personality, and she said, "I hitched my star to Ed, and more or less for better or worse, right? But she loved him."
Yeah, and that she told me that many a time. She said, "For better or worse, I loved him, I hated him." I mean, they had their ups and downs. They had their battles. They had physical fights. The battle in Bickerson's,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, not quite that bad. They must have had great makeup sex, is all I can figure. I'm sorry. Did I
You
just
actually,
say
I
that?
think you mentioned that in the
Did I
book.
say that on the radio?
Yeah.
We're gonna edit that one out,
We
guys.
will not be monetized for this one. That's fine.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
So Ed's last place was in Yucca, and
It
now
was
I
on
guess
Yucca.
it's
It
a
was
place.
on Yucca. People always call it the Yucca Flats. It
Yucca
was
Flats
not
because
the
of
name
the
of
Tor
the
Johnson movie,
apartment
right?
building.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's why people jokingly call it Yucca Flats, because the word flats is apartments in England.
Exactly.
You,
Yeah.
you rent a flat. You don't rent an apartment. You rent a flat. So I can see why people do that. The real name of the apartment building was the Fleck Apartments, Fleck. That was the name of the building, like the whatever apartments. And they moved in there on the strength of Ed's friendship with an ex-stripper, burlesque performer from Las Vegas, who was then managing the building. And I still to this, I have no idea what actual year they moved in. 71, 2, 3, 4. I have no idea. All I know is that Ed died in 1978. So I ascribe it to some time in the late 70s, mid 70s, when they were offered a free apartment for Ed to help write the memoir of this burlesque dancer, stripper, performer, whose last name, by the way, was Woods with an S, no relation. And so they moved in there, but at that time, the Yucca Corridor, you can look it up on Wiki, the Yucca Corridor, and it will tell you all you need to know about what that area in that neighborhood was like back then. When I moved here in 1989, it was still a rough neighborhood controlled by the 18th Street Gang, and I allude to the fact that there were gunshots Friday, Saturday nights, and whatnot. And Kathy in Nightmare of Ecstasy talks about the gangs and the prostitutes and all of that kind of stuff. And I think Doter, the girl that Ed wanted to cast as
Was
the
her name
army.
Shannon Dolder? Or?
Shannon Dolder, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot her first name. Talks about how bad the neighborhood was at that point. So it was really the bottom of the barrel for them to live there. Then, of course, Ed was still writing for Bernie. He was still writing the occasional script for Stephen Apostoloff and selling them. And I've seen some of the contracts from that Christopher Apostoloff has of some of these films that Ed wrote that have never been produced. We're hoping to get those in book form through Bear Manor.
That'd be great.
I'm sorry.
That'd be great.
Yeah, it's on the to-do list, and Chris says he's going to be doing that, but I don't know. I'm just hoping because I know all the fans would love to read them and see them, and with notes, and Joe Blevins would be doing kind of the annotation and the notes about the scripts and stuff. So we're hoping for that.
Well,
Now
can I ask you one more quick thing? Because you mentioned this in your book also. You'd like to see, and I think it'd be interesting, a movie of Ed Wood's decline in Hollywood.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Is there any hope of that, do you think, out there?
You're asking the wrong person.
The wrong person, right? Yeah. Because I think it'd be ideal for streaming or something, maybe.
I think Joe proposed not too long ago on one of his Ed Wood Wednesdays blog that Johnny Depp is now at the age that Ed was when he died, that he would still be the perfect person.
He mentioned that in our podcast too.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, he did. Yeah, and has always been my. They'd have to cover up all his tattoos, but I would love to see. I mean, obviously, it's a tragedy. Mm-hmm. And again, that downward spiral to the fact that they get evicted from the apartment, and 3 days later, Eddie's dead from a heart attack, just on the cusp of the explosion, or I don't know, maybe it's not an explosion, the little squib of fame that the Golden Turkey Awards brought to him, and how that kind of escalated why you and I are talking right now. and kind of culminated with and I just recently just did a little tiny mini bio of Ed for the Hollywood Museum. We're hoping to have an exhibit there in October. And I said it has the proverbial Disney ending. You know, Ed Wood's life. He did eventually achieve the fame in Hollywood that he strove for all his life. The reason he moved here, you know, in the late 40s to make it in Hollywood, like so many thousands of other kids who come here, just Hollywood rat race, right? You just got off the bus at Hollywood and Vine, and
I think that might be his best book, actually, Hollywood Rat Race. You know, this is
it's the most on. I mean, it's not. I mean, he did some nonfiction books that are, you know, like Sex, Shroud, and Caskets, which are like, you know, the great crimes of, you
yeah.
know, of history. But yeah, and that was the one that Kathy really, really, really wanted to get published after we met Bob Weinberg, and he started working with Kathy on that. But
Yeah, you mentioned
yeah,
that, and I want to. Joe and I were doing some prep, and he gave me some questions he wants to ask as we were doing it. But I'm going to preface this: Ed Wood dies at Peter Coe's house. Okay,
the apartment,
and
yeah.
he dies alone, calling for somebody. At least that's the legend. Okay, and he they have Hollywood Rat Race. He saves, right, and then
Yeah, well, yeah, they had the manuscript for Hollywood Rat Race, and the script for I Woke Up Early the Day I Died was in the suitcase.
so also. But do you think? Because this would be the holy grail if they ever found it. Do you think that we'd ever find Lugosi post
No,
mortem?
no, I know where you're going with that. No.
So you don't
The
think?
only rumor that's extant out there is that Bela Jr. has a copy of it, and I don't even. And Bob Kremer, who's the Lugosi expert, not only in our group, but he's written the book, and is in touch with the Lugosi family, says he doesn't even know.
You,
So no, but it was not in the suitcase. I mean, Kathy told me they had a file cabinet that had like some reels like the Bela footage from Plan 9 on those little reels that Ed used later on for that, and who knows what else was in
yeah,
there. She
good
couldn't
point.
remember, but she did say that there was a file cabinet and they didn't have time, and the sheriffs wouldn't let them back in. They only had enough time to put what they could in that little suitcase. And there was one more thing that they put in there, which I'm going to share with you now, which I
Yeah,
hope you find okay.
the Angora sweater. Wow, that's fascinating. Edward loved Angora.
This was Ed's last actual Angora sweater that he wore. They
That,
were, they saved it that day. So
that is really cool. You know, you've worked so hard to compile Ed Wood's short stories so far into 2 volumes,
yeah,
and also his nonfiction into 1 volume. And
correct.
you've worked on books, and you're trying to track down. You admit that you can't really do copyright law; it's so expensive. But you track down to see who might be bootlegging this stuff and everything. But Ed Wood, I want Ed Wood. The question I kept thinking: what would Ed Wood think? You go ahead and ask the question, Joe.
What would Ed Wood think about the increased popularity of his works and himself as a creator?
Uh, well, thank you for asking that, because I just that again, that was something I wrote in this little short bio that for the Hollywood Museum, was that whenever that subject came up with Kathy, she always said Ed would have loved it. He would have loved the attention. He would have just wallowed in it like a pig in mud. I almost said a different word, but that was how she felt, because excuse me, he worked all his life for some kind of recognition, mainstream. You know, he would have loved to have made Dracula Part 2 with the real Bela Lugosi in 1953 if he would have had the money for it. But he never did. He didn't have any of that, none of those advantages. And he felt like some of his ideas got stolen from him. Um, and who knows? I mean, ideas are just ideas. We all have them, right?
Yeah, you know, it is. I keep thinking in the 50s, Ed Wood probably didn't have enough insider contacts, perhaps, to get in there, and then maybe in the 60s, the alcohol started to get in the way and stuff like that.
Right. Well,
But yeah, go on.
no. Go ahead, finish your thought.
Well, I was thinking Ed Wood had a dream. He wanted to make his own movies. I get the feeling if Ed Wood had not had that dream, he probably would have had a pretty good career cranking out scripts for a lot of genre films. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's just
no, I totally agree. He would have been writing for all the Poverty Row films and all that
yeah.
kind of stuff. I kind of had a similar question asked me recently, and I my take on Ed is he did not have the technical training to be a director. He
Hmm.
just assumed that he could be one. It was very seat of your pants. He didn't go to film school. They didn't have them then. You went to the studio system. I mean, but he did work briefly at a studio, what Universal or you see the scene of Johnny Depp carrying the potted plant down the sound stages and
Yeah.
everything. That's based on reality. I'm not sure exactly what kind of job Ed actually would have had, but he would have been on a sound stage for working for a movie company. The thing to have done would have been to latch on to somebody, learn a trade. Like I learned how to push buttons on a radio board.
Hmm.
He should have learned how to be a cameraman or how to, the electrical guy or the assistant to the producer or whatever back then could go up through the studio system. But with him, he was um, very independent, it seemed like. And plus, you had the world of television was just opening up in the early 50s, also. So I think he saw that medium as a place where if you had some of the skills and talent that you could probably get in there. That's why he tried to make the TV shows, Final Curtain and When the Sun Arises or When the Sun Rises or whatever. Um, and he did work in TV, and he also tried to make television commercials and all that kind of stuff. But he was learning as he went along, So he
Hmm.
never really had that kind of technical training that I think he needed um, to have been, dare I say, a good director.
Hmm.
You know,
Well, the secret of a cult director is they are unique and can't be replicated.
exactly. I have. If Ed would have found that career, we would never be having this discussion.
Yeah, he would have been a pedestrian writer probably because he was working for other people. I mean, we would have had a
Exactly.
bunch of Bride of the Beast out there or something,
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
Eh,
I want to ask a little bit more about I want to give a chance to talk about Bob Weinberg and what he did for Kathy and things like that. If you want to
Okay.
just mention a little bit about.
Well, Bob kind of came into this. A mutual friend, a film editor of mine, a mutual friend of Bob and mine, named Mark Helfrich, who's done a lot of editing on major films, and it was also attending these Ed Woodathons, which is where I met him. Suggested Bob Weinberg, who had done some legal work for him. And the very first time I called Bob, we had a phone conversation for at least an hour. Me trying to explain Ed Wood, me trying to explain who Kathy Wood was, uh, and all of that. And Bob graciously said, "Yeah, it sounds interesting. I'd like to meet her if that's okay." And we arranged that, and that was the day where Bob came over, and the three of us were sitting in Kathy's little living room. And about 20 or 30 minutes into them chatting and me just kind of being a fly on the wall, Kathy turned to me and said, "Bob, you can go ahead and leave now. I want to talk to my lawyer."
Yeah, that was guys. I remember that part in the book.
And I went, "Okay, well, we're good here." And so Bob did a ton of work, not only the contract with the Disney people, but getting some money for Kathy because she was on some social programs that kind of upset the apple cart a little bit. He had to do that. And then all of a sudden, there's projects like the manuscript for Hollywood Rat Race. Kathy, really, that was a dream of hers to get published. Bob facilitated that. I woke up early the day I died. Kathy always said that was Ed's dream project, that she always wanted to get that done. Bob knew some people in the film business who liked the idea, and that movie actually got made. Plus, there was a ton of other legal type of work that Bob did for her. And again, with Ed's estate, I I can talk about it, but I'm so confused I don't know what to say about it because it's just kind of like a tangle of like, when you go fishing and you tangle your line and you just don't know which way's which. It's kind of like that. There's nothing cut and dried because a lot of Ed's work was work for hire. He'd also, his scripts he'd sell. He sold Plan 9 for $1, right? I mean, that's Kathy was there that day.
Yeah,
She
you
said
mentioned that. He
she saw
also,
the dollar.
you've talked about Rob Craig and Gary Rhodes doing some good work on his life. Rhodes wrote the book on, or did a book on Bride of the Monster, and
Right.
that apparently made money, but Ed never saw this stuff, did he?
No, Ed never saw a dime for most of that stuff.
Yeah, it's a
He
shame.
was lucky to get enough money to complete the films and pay the actors.
Yeah, that's it's bittersweet to me to see that happen.
Yeah.
And I really feel bad about the last years. This is something, I don't know if you know about this or not, but I read in cult movies a long time ago that when Peter Coe was married to a young woman, I think her name was Kathy Orison, and she wrote an article about how Ed in the late 60s, Peter would go visit, and he had his young kids, and Ed loved to make little sets of Bride of Frankenstein
Yep.
or things like that. And the
Yep.
kids asked for him, and Ed said, "Well, I made them for you," and
Yeah.
gave him. And that's just the kind of personality I think, despite all of his dysfunctions, he was a kind guy, a good guy.
Last year I met Peter Canego, I hope I pronounced his last name correct. He's Peter Coe's son, who you kind of reference there. He doesn't go by Coe, he goes by his dad's actual
Yeah.
Czechoslovakian, whatever his real name was. So Peter and I were both being interviewed for it's a long story and I probably can't even go into it. But Peter told the story because he was 7 or 8 when Ed died, and he was actually there that weekend, and that's a whole nother story, which you should talk to him sometime about. But he said that, and this really surprised me. He was like 5 or 6, and it was when uh, they used to throw little parties, and Peter's stepmom, the one that you referred to, she was also there that day with the interview, so I got a
Oh.
chance to meet her and talk to her. She's still alive, but she's not on Facebook or anything. Anyway, so Peter was telling this story about how Ed made him a little diorama
Yeah, that was it.
of King Kong bursting out of his chains.
You know what? It may have been King Kong. I may have misremembered there.
No, but you had the point right.
Yeah.
That Ed would make these little dioramas out of whatever materials he had, matchsticks. I
Yeah.
have no idea. And gifted them to young Peter just to, as whatever. So, yes, there was a gentle side to Ed. I mean, he loved dogs. He and Kathy never had any children. And the rumor about Ed having a daughter is inconclusive. I'll just say it that way. There was actually a DNA test that's done, so it is conclusive. But I'm not at liberty.
No,
to say.
you don't have to tell us. Okay.
No, I'm just saying. So Ed, I mean Ed, I obviously never met him, but listening to Kathy, she would laugh. She would tell me stories, and she'd break out laughing, and tears would come down her face. She was cracking up so much about it. So, like Ed had a pet monkey. I don't know, like a little chimpanzee that he bought from the pet store that ran around the apartment.
They had
Like
to
he
give
had
him-
him all for 24 hours, and he was throwing shit, and
Yeah.
Ed just freaked out, and they caught him, and they had to return him to the pet store. And the story with Ed with the Fuller Brushman who, rang the doorbell, and Ed got out of the bathtub and went and opened the door and invited the guy back for a drink and to sell him some brushes. That was it, and they became fast friends and would go hiking or do invite over to parties and stuff like that. And in fact, uh, Fran Silly, who was the Fuller Brushman's wife and then later widow, actually was the person who carried Kathy's remains in the container from the memorial chapel we had the service at to her actual interment and stuff like that. And she has since passed away. But at that time, I mean, Ed was the life of the party. It was, he'd be. I don't know. I always wonder if he was taking speed and drinking and smoking pot and all that. And Kathy said he tried pot one time. It put him to sleep. He didn't like it. So.
I want to thank you for giving us readers Kathy's personality and a
I
story of
tried.
her life. And in fact, based on what I read, I have a place to go besides seeing you again. Finally seeing you, I'm going to go visit Kathy's gravesite also,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
I
yeah,
believe
yeah.
is, you mentioned it's right next to close to Valentino, right?
Yeah, it's just around the corner from Rudolph
Yeah.
Valentino, and I can't remember what the name of the mausoleum is. It's kind of funny because right above her is the guy who played Larry Tate on Bewitched, the Darren
David
Spross.
something. I can't remember his last name. David, I think.
Yeah, I think that was his character name, right? Larry Tate.
Larry Tate, but his name is David. I can't remember the last name, but it's not
Yeah,
important.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not good with that, but his little niche is up above it. It's the kind that has a glass,
And
in
everything.
front of it, and it's got a little photo of him and a little thing about him being in Bewitched and all that kind of stuff. So
So
I know she would have liked the neighborhood.
so I'm going to ask you this: are there any future like collections of Wood fiction or nonfiction that might be coming out, or books?
Um, it's so difficult now to find the magazines that had the articles. When eBay had their adult merchandise section, it was easy to find. Well, relatively easy to find the magazines that had the articles and the short stories in there. And after the last book of short fiction got put out a few years ago, and before eBay stopped selling adult materials, I picked up maybe 4 or 5 more. So I have a few that have not been published yet, and I almost thought of adding them to the end of my memoir. But you'll appreciate this. I wrote my memoir so that my Mormon sister and her family can read it.
Oh, good for you.
They live there. They live in Colorado Springs, but most of my nieces and nephews are in
Mhm.
Salt Lake City and Provo and Orem and places over there. So I'm sure you can respect the fact that the only thing that's in there is when Kathy, and I quoted her. I didn't write anything bad, but I quoted Kathy as saying that the night that they first met and went back to his apartment so he could show her his scrapbooks, and she says, and he didn't even screw me. Sorry, I hope I
That's
didn't
okay.
offend anybody with
No.
that one.
Have you
But
passed
that
through?
was,
Have you passed through Ogden in your life?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I've whenever my nieces get married, sealed, it's always been in the Salt Lake City area, so I've kind of gone over there. In fact, and I went up to the total solar eclipse a few years ago and drove up there and went up to Idaho Falls,
Ah,
so to see the total eclipse of the sun up there. So
well, we have a
and
really cool street, 25th Street in Ogden. They call it
mm-hmm,
historic 25th Street. If you ever
mm-hmm.
watched the Stephen King movie, the Stand,
Oh,
not the
no,
new one, the one back in 30 years ago or so, where they have the train station in Ogden just in one scene for a few seconds.
oh, cool.
And well,
Cool.
that's they make a lot of movies out here too. It's
Yeah, no, no. I'm sure that it's less taxes, and I mean, in California, you get taxed up the wazoo when you're doing that kind of stuff. To be honest with you, and I tell this to a lot of my friends, it's like I'm not that much of a movie person. To be
hmm
honest, I have certain ones I like and ones I see, and I have certain favorites that I'll watch, all the time, like if it's on or if it's screening somewhere. But again, like with the Edwood Film Festival, that was my one chance to kind of discover that. I'm much more into music. That was, having played in bands. I saw the Beatles.
Wow, that's cool.
So there you go with that one. But so it's like with Stan over here. He's referencing all these movies that he saw, like especially in the 80s and 90s, and I'm going, nope,
You could
haven't
tell
seen
Stan the best movies. They may not have been the best movies ever made, but the funnest movies ever made were in the 80s.
it.
Heck,
Absolutely.
I just do Sundance and watch whether it's Paul Hogan, whether it's Clint Eastwood, whether it's John Hughes, and I just revel in those. Okay.
I was in a movie with Paul Hogan.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that,
I
didn't you?
did.
Yeah, you were
Yeah,
an extra in the film, and what was it called again?
almost an angel.
Almost an Angel. In fact, I was
If you
gonna. Thank you for reminding me because I'm gonna go watch that movie and
Yeah,
look
go
for you.
watch. Yeah, and it's easy because I'm in the first 5 minutes of it. Then you can like just ignore the rest of it.
Yeah, it's one of the few I haven't seen yet of Paul Hogan.
Well, you're not missing a whole lot, you know.
So when is Kathy Wooden Eye being officially released?
I don't have a set date. The cover art, Javier Hernandez, who's in the Facebook group, it's not. I'm using the photograph. Oh, it's up there.
Okay, sorry.
It's up here someplace. I'm not sure.
I just saw the photo with Patricia Arquette right there.
Yeah, that's in the book too. Anyway, the last note I got from him was once they get the artwork, which is the front and the back cover of it, they hope to have it out in a couple of weeks. So
Great.
I'm assuming by the end of September, the first time. I kind of pleaded with him to try and get it out by October. I'd love to have copies. There are going to be the American Cinematheque. It hasn't been officially announced. Are going to be screening 4 of Ed's films on Thursday nights at one of their theaters in East Hollywood. Starting on Ed's birthday on the 10th, and then each Thursday night they'll be screening.
How I wish I could go to that.
Well, you've got 4 opportunities. They're going to be doing like Plan 9, Glen or Glenda. I've convinced them to do Revenge of the Dead, the new version of that. Hopefully they'll be doing that. And then on Halloween night, Bride of the Monster.
Wow. You know, I got to see in Boston in 1996, I think it was at Harvard, I saw Plan 9 from Outer Space on a big screen.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a ton of fun. I mean, it really is. I can't say I've seen it 100 times, but
I've seen it 200, so I'm sorry.
I've seen it at least 10 or 20 at this point, and most of the time have been on local screenings on a big screen. So
you've seen it more on the big screen than I have.
Well, I mean, it's one of those for revival houses and stuff like that. And same with Glen or Glenda. I've seen Glen or Glenda on the big screen twice in the last 3 months.
That's cool. You know.
Well, I take that back. Once in the last 3 months, and then last year, they screened it as part of the LGBTQ Alamo Drafthouse film series.
Yeah, you mentioned that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Do you remember the big? We're getting to the point where we're going to have to wrap up now, but we're.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
I know. I can't shut up. Remember when they had that Paramount had? I don't know if it was a hoax or what. Said they were going to show Glen or Glenda around 1980 or something, and you don't remember it because you weren't involved yet, but it was a big thing back about 40 odd years ago where it was canceled at the last minute.
I have read, in fact, just recently, that there was going to be that whatever you said, like Paramount was going to do a re-release of Glen or Glenda on a big screen, and I want to say it did, and it screened like in New York, but I could be wrong. But I do recall what you were saying. I remember probably the first time I ever heard of Ed Wood was It Came from Hollywood.
Yeah,
with John Candy and Dan Aykroyd doing the famous sweater.
Yeah, and they're on like a motorbike or something.
Yeah, a tri-bike with a little sidecar.
Yeah, the first time I saw Plan 9 was on Movies Till Dawn. It was either Channel 13 or 9, and I taped it in the middle of the night. And I still own that, and eventually I transferred over to a DVD. And it's fun to just put in and watch Plan 9 in between the used car commercials, and things like that. But now I think to myself, well, Ed Wood would have been dead. But when it was on in the 70s, I've read accounts where he would call everybody up, and I think it's in your book too, telling people to do that. Well, listen, we've really enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
By the way, you got any more questions for me?
Well, we may have a follow-up sometime, but I wanted to say, I have to give this spiel. We're Plan9Crunch. Subscribe to us at YouTube. We're on Plan9Crunch blog and podcast and blog and Facebook. We're even on TikTok, something I know very little about. My daughter handles it. And we have Plan9Crunch.com as a blog. You probably read the blog because I've reviewed some of your books.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we really enjoyed this. By the way, you mentioned Bob Kramer. He's going to be on this show the first Saturday in October. We're going to talk to him. We're going to try to devote October to Lugosi and everything. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. It's I guess I have to get used to this. This is kind of new for me. I mean, I've been on the other end when I worked in radio. I would do interviews, obviously audio, But to have a project that I like and I'm really proud of, I think Kathy would have you lied to me when she knew that I was writing about her personal life. So I know it's going to be like the ending of Fanny and Alexander when I get to heaven. She's gonna come and get me. I told you not to write that damn book. Well, okay, whatever.
You see one of those stories in the Ed Wood anthology has Wood in Heaven with
Yeah,
yeah, that was interesting. Anyways,
exactly.
Michael Kopner's then girlfriend invited me to that 2000 thing,
Hmm.
and she's going to give me movies to review, and I didn't go. One of my regrets. I would have liked to have shaken Kathy Wood's
Oh,
hand.
the cult movie convention.
Yeah, the Cult Movies Convention.
Yeah, that was fun. That
Yeah,
was
it
fun.
was. By the way, you mentioned Michael Kopner has resurfaced, writing occasionally for a publication that I think is now defunct called Mondo Cult.
Oh,
So
okay.
he's still
Yeah,
around,
yeah,
but it's really tragic what happened to him. But that's another.
yeah. He definitely has some problems. I've talked to one of the Ed Wood fans who lives here in Los Angeles who knew him pretty well, and yeah, it makes me think of Eric Caden,
Yeah, that's
obviously.
really tragic what
Yeah,
happened.
and Eric became a friend, and I was sad to see when Eric passed away a few years ago and stuff. But yeah, it's yeah, that whole thing. But that convention was a lot of fun, and got to meet George the Animal Steele, so that was
Oh
worth
yeah,
it.
I would have loved to have seen Forey Ackerman play sing, I think, or something at that.
I don't. He's the one that presented Kathy with the little award,
Well, he
which
is a
I wish
legend
I
in this
had.
genre. Yeah, he definitely
I'm
was.
sorry.
I wonder how many secrets went with him because he had a mansion house full of stuff that.
Oh yeah, I have no idea. I know they were selling off a lot of that, and a lot of collectors were picking things up
Yeah.
from there and stuff.
Well, Buddy Barnett's a cool guy too. Hope to interview him sometime on this show, the publisher.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Anyways, I'm just rambling because I can't help myself.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate it. Just let me know when this is up so we can
It's
post it.
gonna
I'm sure you'll
drop
be posting it in the group.
unless
So
something happens. It will drop Friday at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time.
okay, great. Yeah,
th-
and I'll share it in, on my own page,
oh,
personal
I
page. Just
appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
So we always say this at the end. That's a wrap.